of the Clatsop County Comprehensive Plan Update Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee. It is 4 p.m. My name is Andy Davis. I am your chair. I'm going to start with introductions. We'll go around the table. Maybe we can start with Gail, but I might also ask members of the public if you could briefly introduce yourselves. Members that are at the table, I would just ask you to say your name, maybe what you do in your private life, and who you are representing at the table here today. Thank you. Gail?
Gail Henriksen, Community Development Director.
Cheryl Johnson, and I'm the Citizen Advisory Council member for the Northeast County, so that's sort of Napa, Swenson, Brownsmead. And then I am the liaison from that one to this countywide group, and I am retired library media specialist.
Robert Strickland. I live on Clatsop Plains. In parallel with Cheryl, I'm on the Clatsop Plains Citizen Advisory Committee, and then passed off to the countywide here.
My name is Jim Allegria. I'm semi-retired. I still do some consulting work on the side, and I'm on the countywide advisory committee.
I'm Jane Mitchell. I'm the vice chair. I'm a retired planner, mainly a volunteer for the last 25 years, and I live in Astoria, and I'm on the countywide group.
My name is Andy Davis. I'm your chair. I'm a data analyst for Greater Oregon Behavioral Health Incorporated. I'm representing the countywide group as well. I live here in Astoria.
Todd Lindy is my name. I'm a retired architect. I am representing the Southwest Coastal CAC, and also, of course, I'm a representative here.
And I'm Pat Corcoran with the OSU Extension Service, and I'm representing at the countywide level at this Citizen Advisory Group as well.
Ron Weber, represent Jewel, LC, and the Seaside folks too. And I took a promotion and left my previous job so I could just go create things.
Nancy, could we start with you and just introduce yourself? And
I'm Nancy Ferber. I'm a coastal planner just across the street from the river estuaries in Napa.
John Nygaard, Warren Snyder.
John, maybe. Yeah.
I'm the stewardship coordinator with Hampton Family Forest Management Division, Hampton Lumber.
Good evening. I'm Ashley Lepora. I work for the Oregon Department of Forestry, the stewardship forester.
I'm Matt Betts. I work for Jesse Brown.
Thank you.
Tim Shields.
I'm Symphony with it. I live in Napa, and I work for Jay Brown and Lobby. Lori Larson, and I also live in Napa and work for Jay Brown.
You are Jay Browning.
I'm Shelley Solon. Jim Ginsburg, Lover. I'm Diane Jody, and I'm with the LC Jewel.
Sir, do you mind just briefly introducing yourself too?
I'm Jared Browning.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yes, Gail.
So also, if I could ask everyone, if you're interested in getting future notifications, if you would sign in and leave some way to contact you, email or mailing address. And if you don't want information, if you could just please sign in, so we're trying to count how many people we reach out to. Please have candy, and we are live streaming this meeting today, so you're our first group we're live streaming. It's on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so if you Google or go to YouTube and search Clatsop County Board of Commissioners, it'll bring up our YouTube channel and you can watch us.
Thank you, Gail. I will point out we do have a microphone. We haven't done this typically before, but today, since we are live streaming, we may try to get, when we're getting audience comment, to ask you to speak with the microphone, and one of us can certainly help share the microphone as we need it.
Could the camera do your smile?
All of them, I guess.
Yeah, there's one, it's pointed this way, so the audience doesn't show up, but all the board members will.
Good, good. I'm glad it's not getting my bald spot. All right.
Just from the wing.
So the next item we've got is the review of the meeting summary from our last meeting. I might ask that we table this unless someone has immediate changes, because this is our first opportunity that we've seen it, or at least for me it is, and I don't want to necessarily take the time to review them now. Anybody care to make a motion to table this till the next meeting? Todd, do I have a second? Thank you, Pat. Without objection, we'll table that till our next meeting.
What was the motion?
The motion is to table the reading of the minutes and review the minutes from the last meeting.
Thank you.
And now we have reports from the planning area CAC liaisons. I might start at the other end this time. Ron, you've come freshly from a meeting. Do you want to report to us what you guys talked about today?
Sure. We went over, well, first off, we went through all of our Goal 4 stuff, and we're going to hand those in before the 19th so they can coordinate all that information. And one of my personal favorites was we took a step back and went back over to Goal 1 to Policy 2, which you guys probably don't have. It's the one where we need mailers out in our area. And if we start in April, coordinate that to the mailbox, I can't remember what their name is, Jewel Elsie mailbox folks, you'll hit 384 families, which will really increase our people that come to meetings. But I was just suggesting do it every quarter. Do it, show what's coming up, which goal, and show which is coming up every quarter, and they can put it on the refrigerator, and then pick their pony, whichever one they want to come to, and just try to get people there. That was the first thing I learned. And then we went through, this is a lot of conversation on our Goal 4 policies.
Okay.
So I'm ready for it.
Do you want to go over those policies now or when we do the larger discussion? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Todd, have you met since last meeting?
Yes, we did. We met on the 13th of November. There were 3 members present. 2 were traveling and couldn't attend, but that made a quorum of 3. We reviewed a couple of the motions that we had passed on agriculture and made some changes in language, but no changes in substance. And then we had a series of proposals, and maybe like Ron, I should not go through all of those. I can pass those on or whatever.
Okay, sure. Robert, have you met since last time?
I don't think we've met since.
Okay, I mean, it has been an abbreviated window this time. Okay, thank you. Cheryl?
I'm the rep from Northeast, and we met November 7th, so I reported out from us at the last group meeting for this one, which was November 21st. And then we will meet again next week, so we meet on December 10th. I and one other person from our group attended the forestry conversation that was recently held, and I attended the field trip, and I reported out at that one at our last group meeting on the 21st too. So I don't have anything new.
Okay, thank you. Gail, do you happen to have notes from any of the liaison groups that aren't represented here today?
Yeah, so the only other group would be the Lewis and Clark group, and they met on November 26th, and they went through the policies in Goal 4. They really didn't have a lot to comment on at that point. There were some things that were obviously outdated and no longer relevant that they recommended be deleted, but their meeting was fairly quick and simple, and that was all that they focused on. So.
Okay, thank you. So the next item for us really is into the meat of the goal for discussion. So two things. So we have had some previous discussion about goal 4. If we need to bring up any previous points from the meeting summary, you all are welcome to do that. I know we have at least one point from Cheryl to cover in detail, hopefully. But we also have some maybe areas to cover in today's agenda. In addition to which, we would take input from the public about important items that you would like to talk about or hear about today. I will say we have some guests from the public here that we may lean on for expertise, especially as Goal 4, which is part of our comp plan, interacts with state regulation and what constraints that puts on us, what we can control and what we can't. So as we go through the Goal 4 discussion today, especially Ashley, we may call on you quite a bit. Does anyone have a point that we'd like to start with? Cheryl, are you prepared to talk about salmon policy? Was a point that we were going to return to today. Are you prepared for that portion, or?
I can just briefly address it. So
Sure.
at the last group meeting, which was November 21st, I pointed out that in all of the policies that salmon A wasn't mentioned and B didn't have a specific policy, and we briefly discussed that, and then Andy tasked me with writing one, and that turnaround time has been too short. My brain has been engaged on it, but I don't have anything to present to you today. And I have reached out to some other people, so that one is in progress.
Okay, fair enough. It's an ongoing process.
I've forgotten who it was who, at a recent meeting, it was a young person in the back of the room, emphasizing that there's more to a forest than a plantation. I want to preface that with, I have zero antipathy to industrial forestry. I am intrigued by the visions of biodiversity in more complex forests, and I'd love for us to learn a path where these are not in conflict, and that we are clearly supportive of our industrial foresters, but also that image of walking into the woods with 100 species waving at us, and I don't think there's a clash there. I want them both in the county, and I think our legal focus has largely been to make sure we're not undermining industrial forestry. But I'd love for us to give a kiss and a hug to the biodiversity where you go out and the birds are fluttering and the bats are doing their thing, and it's all a happy woodland. And how we do that, I don't care.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Ron, yeah.
Is there any way that the folks can get the policy list?
Gail, do we have any extras of the policy list around?
I only have one extra copy.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure. So they know where we're at. Thanks, Gil.
Or does anyone have a list from the Goal 4 text itself that isn't chicken scratched all over? Because we can just make copies, but. Okay. Sure. Ron, while we're arranging that, do you want to start going into items that your group had talked about?
Oh, it was really interesting. It was brought up by one of our professionals. Policy 1.
Yep. I might ask you to speak into the mic a little bit more too, Ron. Sorry.
Just real short on policy 1 is because toward the end of that it says, and grazing land for livestock. into conserved for forest uses. And that was brought about private or industrial forests can have livestock in them, which may or may not be good if the livestock are trampling what's just planted. But that would be something to look at.
Ashley,
Do you want to keep going? Or we go stick on policy one?
Let's stick with that question.
As long as what?
As long as the seedlings are protected, it's not a conflict.
Okay.
But stay on state forest land, there's only one grazing permit, and it's less than 10 acres. So just want to throw that out there, considering state forest is one of the largest landowners.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Can I ask if there's been an issue about that being negative towards forestry at all in Clatsop County? Is that something that land use planning, is there a problem for land use planning to address? Doesn't sound like there's much at all.
No.
Okay. Do we know, in the private timberlands, is there much grazing going on in any of the private timberlands?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm not going to speak for Florida.
I think we're aware of a few small woodland somewhere in it's much more common in other parts of the state. It's probably
True. Because it could.
Sure.
Well, it does seem to introduce an entirely different sort of realm of problems that could emerge in the future. If it was just sort of a cut and paste from East Side Forest, maybe it's something we can look at to, if there's no objection to reducing, getting that out of there, keep it a forestry, with forestry and grazing would be an ag. I don't feel strongly about that, I just wouldn't want that to come back and be a problem with converting forest land to grazing land for some purposes.
I do feel strongly about it, that somehow we've separated parts in the concept of agroforestry. And the USDA National Center for Agroforestry is in Indiana. And the idea that you can enhance a lot doing both. And I think we have often thought here, never heard that. We have separate zones where we have an agroforestry, but it sure as hell never brought to mind agroforestry. And, whoever wrote that couldn't have talked for 30 seconds about agroforestry. So I think it'd be great if we somehow eliminate some of those divisions and say that, gee, this idea of wildlife enhancement, yes, you can grow trees and have hedgerows and have woodlots, have birds, that it is not anti-forestry to have agroforestry. It's a free newsletter that they'd be happy to send you. It's well written. Just Google Center for Agroforestry, Indiana, USDA, and I think we'd all get a better, less narrow grasp of.
I agree with you, actually. That's a really good point, of having a more natural mixed-use type of thing. In the comprehensive plan, I keep trying to discipline myself to what part of Goal 4 is, for land use planning purposes, the place to express that. As you're speaking, I was also thinking that might have more to do with smaller parcels versus larger parcels that are more industrially managed. There would be, I guess I could see that the different types of use would have different types of attitudes towards the ability to have agroforestry. I don't know. I guess I'm not disagreeing, but I'm seeing that the industrial use might be less interested in that than maybe the smaller parcels.
Yes, Jim.
Yeah, I also don't really see a need to make any restrictions on it. It's naturally an AF zone. You're more apt to have more grazing mixed with forestry because that's what AF is. The larger parcels are more apt to be industrial forest lands. And like we've heard from the group, it's really not a factor. I mean, they're not in the grazing business. If they so choose to, I mean, they're the ones that's responsible for their seedling. So there's a self-governing mechanism involved, and of course, the canopy closes in rather quickly. So I don't really see it as we're going to leave it. I would suggest that you can allow it in the slim chance there may be an isolated case, but it's not a big issue that's going to endanger industrial forestry.
Okay. Thank you. Ron, do you want to move on to the next item from you guys?
Policy 2. And this one came right back to what Jim had said last week, because at the very end, another approval criteria in countywide forest land policies 19, 20, 21. And it's just,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. Sorry.
Also, Andy, if we're going to continue to send questions out to Ashley, should we just put the mic out there for her?
Sure, that's fine with me. Cheryl, do you mind running that out?
Okay. As I was saying, policy 2, and it goes back to what Jim said last time, was and other approval criteria in countywide forest lands policies 19, 20, and 21. This stuff is really all walked together. So it's impressive. And that was the topic last time, is try to figure out how to not do that and just pancake them where we need to be with these topics. And that one, forest lands, shall be designated, shall be designated conservation forest in the county comprehensive plan. Designation, comprehensive plan designation is conservation forest. We retained the goal. That was one of our retain the goal. Sounds right. It's because we're on this, you retain it or you meet the goal, and personally I put, and everybody on our committee gets to do one of these goal planning things, and I put that we retain the goal.
Okay. Any comments on that portion? Any comments? Seeing none, Ron, do you have another one?
Policy 3?
Okay.
Sure. Well, and that one also retain that goal. Forest practice on lands designated conservation forest shall conform to the Oregon Forest Practices Act and the Oregon Forest Practice Rules as revised. Like we said, it all gets kind of redundant, I think, but it's what it is. And that was another part. I was just trying to figure out which ones are redundant and try to eliminate those as we go. For the people 20 years from now, they don't have to go through this.
And I'm pretty sure that'll be a key role of staff too, to kind of make that easier to read as we go forward. A lot of cutting and pasting.
Boy.
Ashley, I had a question about this particular one, about policy 3, which I'm hoping you all just got handed to you. Are we statutorily required to fulfill this? Do we need this as a policy? Yeah, they're all over the room.
All the, regardless of zoning, that do commercial forest operations are under the Forest Practices Act. I would leave the words that yes, it should be, I'm just kind of setting that this is the standard.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments? Yes, sure.
I don't think that it's redundant, and I do think that it's an important one. Forest Practices Act is referred to a number of times in here, and this is the first time that it comes up. And I would like to see us expand this a bit to say something like forest practices on lands designated conservation forests shall conform to Oregon Forest Practices Act and Oregon Forest Practices rules as a minimum standard. And then in one of the other ones later on, I don't remember offhand which policy, to encourage the landowners to go beyond Forest Practices Act is written in there. I would like to see that added in here. One of the things that we talked about very briefly at the forestry conversation is that other states do have higher standards for Forest Practices Act. Washington's standards are higher than the Oregon standards. I believe that also the California standards are higher than Oregon standards. So I wouldn't want that deleted, and in fact, I would like for it to be clarified, expanded a
When you
bit
say higher,
even.
I think higher, I think we need different standards is a better word than saying higher or lower.
I stand corrected, but yeah, we can do different.
This is a comment regarding aerial spraying and buffer zones.
Roger, can you-
Oh.
I think the fundamental thing was minimum and optional to encourage to do more than whatever it is in any state. I think the encouragement was to, I guess, so no matter what, it was encouragement to do what again, Cheryl?
Sometimes we say meet or exceed.
Say what?
Sometimes the phrase meet or exceed is used. Meet or exceed the Forest Practices Act.
But can what,
Yeah.
where the letters head, those don't really give a sense of direction.
Yes.
Just that it's more what? Carol?
Didn't Oregon lose some money because they didn't meet federal standards? And don't they recount the state that they're higher? We lost a lot of money, I know.
$1.2 billion because coastal streams have not been cleared of debris and silt from logging. Now, this has gone on for a number of years, and there have been several warnings issued, and finally they just cut off the water project grants to $2.2 million in grants. It's a significant loss.
Work with the Coastal Management Program, and that was the funding, their funding for that project, their existence.
Yes, sir.
Andy, do you want to, should we send the mic around for the folks in the?
Ashley's got it right there.
I talk loud enough. You're talking about standards in Washington, standards in Oregon. I've worked in the woods for 47 years. I've seen a lot of change. 25 years ago, we saw change that we liked, and the buffers were one of them. But I've logged in Washington, I've logged in Oregon, and I'm telling you, I see a lot more failure in Washington as far as slides go. And, as far as exceeding, every industrial timber company that I've worked for, and I've worked for Warehouse or Camp Group, the land at Crown Zellerback, I started with Crown Zellerback in '78 as a private contractor. And the biggest failure I saw was on DNR property that we had logged near. And it was a full stand of trees that went down over a canyon. It just happened to be a bad site of, a slide area. But, a lot of the loggers in this community, there's a lot of good loggers, Class Act logging companies, that their own standards without the timber companies, they set their own standards, and we're out there every day. We recreate, hunt, fish, we see the forest. We go in, we'll clear cut, and we watch those clear cuts grow. And one of the big concerns is water quality, you know, protecting the watersheds, all these things. But as far as cleaning out the debris in those creeks in Washington or Oregon, we're not allowed to touch those. That's against the law. Those are supposed to remain intact when they happen. So,
It's supposed to, but it's not happening on some of the for-profit type, I call them Wall Street, but whatever, investment type, limited liability companies. They are running right over those streams and you're contacting and.
well, then they should be turned in because that's not allowed.
Yeah, I'm not arguing
damage
with
is
what
done
you're
then.
saying. I'm just saying it's not universal. You can see it if you want to look. You can see it up and down the coast. It's,
Sounds like
the
Forest
right-of-way
Practices Act
is
conversation.
involved.
Well, there is a lot more investor-type timber companies nowadays than there used to be. You know, Crown Zutterback owned everything around here at one time, and then they got split up, and other companies came in. And, you know, there was Boise Cascade up in the Big Creek area, which Hampton owns now. And, you know, I do tree farm work for Hampton, but mostly we do ODF timber sales. That's what we're set up to do. We have extremely large equipment where we're flying logs over streams, less road building. There's a lot goes on. But every timber manager in this community, Columbia, they set a higher standard than the Forest Practices Act. So, all I gotta say for now.
Thank you. I do want to thank you for the comments, and I appreciate the public input. I do want to make sure there are some areas like essentially part of what you're talking about is enforcement of existing regulation, and at least this body doesn't have anything to do with that. You know, we can encourage our own county plan to go in certain directions. We can encourage the county commission to create certain incentives, but we can't require enforcement of federal regulation from this body. So I just want to try to keep us focused on what we can affect here.
That's what Ashley does.
Yeah.
She works. And I'll tell you, if you screw up, you're going to get bit. So
Could I?
don't screw up.
Jan, sure.
I've been unusually quiet because I was not at the last meeting, so I'm listening and trying to take this in. But spraying and the impacts on local water systems is really a strong concern to me. You know, because once you screw up, it's too late. You know, going back and slapping somebody's hands does not make clean water for small communities. And you know, what I've seen in terms of photographs, that kind of thing, is really strongly concerns me in terms of how much protection there is around those small streams. What is your, you know, you've worked it, I haven't done that. How large do you think that buffer needs to be?
And Jeff can probably answer that, but they don't spray over the streams.
Well, they say they don't, but it drifts. I don't buy that, I'm sorry, that's not good enough for our community.
Currently, many of the helicopters have GPS, and they basically, the helicopter flies, it's being mapped in real time where they're being flown, so we can see. And I'm not on every spray job, but the ones I've monitored on, I've always seen them fly parallel to the streams.
But how far away?
60 feet, is a 60-foot buffer is what the Forest Practices Act requires. The landowner can go above and beyond that.
Okay, well, my house sits on one of these standard old Astoria lots, and it's 50 by 100. And I would be scared to death if somebody was spraying next door. You know, I would not, and so I just am looking for a better standard, really.
Okay, so then that means that you have to work to change the Forest
Yes.
And that's not what we're here to do.
Well, yes, but we, if how are we ever going to change things if we don't work to make those changes?
But that's not part of my understanding of what this process is doing.
I'm going to ask, Gail, is your understanding that we can affect the setback for spray, aerial spray at all in a comprehensive plan?
Not as
process?
part of the comprehensive plan. I mean, you can put it in there, but I will tell you what has happened in other counties where they've adopted that by ballot measure, and they're in the middle of lawsuits. So when it comes to Forest Practices Act, the act is what it is today. And, what we've told our other committees is that if you have concerns about it, the best way to address that in the comp plan is to put in language that encourages the Board of Commissioners to continue to work with the state to review changes, to review the science, and see if there are places where changes can be made. But it's not something that we can change as a county in our comprehensive plan, and it's a statewide act that we're dealing with.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I do think I've heard this concern come up several times, not just from Jan, and I think it's worthwhile for someone, Jan, I might put the thumb on you for this, to come up with language for if we want to put a policy in that encourages the commissioners to go in that direction, that we can put a policy in to encourage that. But,
Okay.
I want us to move forward with the understanding that we have some limitations based on the Forest Practices Act in that area. Pat, you had
I was just going to kind of affirm that saying, that is, as much as everybody probably like to go in and make all kinds of changes to their own liking, this is definitely not the place to do that. And so I'm really thinking about what is the nexus between, the timber industry, private smaller lots, and the land use plan as far as land usage and those kind of things. Unfortunately, it seems like sort of a painfully small sort of realm that we actually can have much change in, other than these encouraging language and stuff. So, rather than throw more gas on fire, I think that's kind of an important box to left alone.
I accept that.
We can tweak goals and aspirations. We can tweak goals and aspirations.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the fellow from the Craig Law Center last time really encouraged you as a group to make recommendations, whether it goes directly to the county or to the Oregon Board of Forestry. There's no reason, doesn't seem to me, that you couldn't send them there as well. But I know that the county really, the commissioners really rely on, groups like yours to give them, to help them craft policy to go forward. Otherwise, they're kind of guessing at what the people of the county want. So it's really important to do that.
Thank you.
And the Board of Forestry has the right under ORSs and OARs to modify the Forest Practices Act. They are responsible for all forests in Oregon, excluding federal. Of course, we have no federal land, virtually none, in Clatsop County. But there's no reason we can't encourage people to go to the Board of Forestry and ask them to do something about this. That's why we've lost 1 million acres of coverage, and we're the largest contributor logging of greenhouse gases in the state. And with this period of climate change, that is very serious.
Thank you. So Cheryl, before we move on, I'm going to come back to you and ask if you want to clarify language or make a motion about including language that says meet or exceed standards and what standards those might be for policy 3.
Tell me again what you're asking for.
So you had suggested language, you started with as a minimum standard. It was suggested that maybe meet or exceed standards might be the language to use. Robert asked, I think, notably about what sort of standard, what direction we might be trying to push people in. So I want to just give you the opportunity that if you want to suggest a change in language, I think this would be the opportune time to do it.
So if we wanted to do Okay, so help me on the wording. If we wanted to do meets or exceeds or at a minimum, what's the cleanest way to proceed on language?
What are you trying to accomplish in this meeting and exceeding?
To say that the Oregon Forest Practices Act is the minimum, and that people are encouraged to go above and beyond it.
To accomplish what?
Better protections for clean air and clean water, but I think that's too narrow.
But it's still a whole lot better than saying, of not giving any guidance about what we're seeking to accomplish by doing more or something.
I see what you're saying. And I don't think at this point that at least I am not ready to propose wording, so.
Fair enough. Do you want to wordsmith that one as well?
I would be willing to work on that, and hopefully other folks and other groups might help us work on
It
that
sounds like
too.
there's other people that might be interested in such a.
My suggestion, if you use such a language, it has to be specific to a particular regulation, so that you don't say meet or exceeds, and as it turns out, it could be interpreted as just the opposite of what you intended.
Exceeding timber production goals, for example, would be something I'm guessing you wouldn't
Right.
like. Yeah.
Right. Good.
Okay. All right, thank you. Ron, I'm going to go back to you.
I think Tim had his hand up.
Oh, sure, Tim.
I had a comment because Robert, I guess
Yes.
it is, had asked, well, meets or exceeds what? So there's flexibility in the Forest Practices Act, and say with stream buffers, there's certain requirements. So you can meet the minimum of those requirements within the, say, gross setback requirement, or you can leave the entire required area left intact. So that's a meet or exceed example is one. You could also get credit within there if you exceed the minimums toward your wildlife trees, or you can leave that entire area intact and leave wildlife trees in addition. So there are meets and exceeds up to the landowner within the Forest Practices Act in various areas. And,
Your specificity helps clarify.
well, that was the point I was trying to make. That's
Yep.
Thank you.
I have another comment. When she was talking about exceeding, what would your thought be on exceeding? How, no, the gentleman. As a person that does it, I mean, what would you do to exceed? Above the minimum, above mediocrity?
Say we're logging near a stream buffer, and we see trees that are leaning into the stream buffer that are outside of it, of the boundaries. We have the flexibility to go ahead and just say, okay, we're going to leave those, add those to the stream buffer. That's exceeding.
So that's your decision?
Yeah, and sometimes we need to talk to people like Ashley or administrators at timber companies. Some timber companies, I used to work a lot for Willamette Industries, which is no longer around, which is a shame. But they would just say, you go ahead and you mark the wildlife trees, or you pick these areas that you think are sensitive, that you should not log in with ground equipment or, you know, those kind of things. So, you know, most everybody I know has made decisions that, you know, for the forest and exceeded what the.
Yeah, for the betterment of the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, you know, we look ahead before we cut, and it's in a lot of logging contracts with timber companies that we meet and exceed the Oregon Forest Practices Act.
Thanks.
And I've worked for a lot of timber companies in 47 years.
There's a lot of times when we're out cutting alongside a stream buffer, And so just because it's within the legal distance away from like a type N stream or a type F stream, even more so, there may not be any trees right there. It might just be sticker bushes or devil's club or something. But in order to protect that, so logs don't go sliding into that buffer, to protect it, us as timber fallers, without anybody's judgment, we will make a decision on our own to leave a row of trees there to protect that buffer that we can fall alongside of, it's to keep the logs from sliding down into the buffer, just to protect it a little bit more.
I'm going to go Roger, then Ron.
Well, I definitely appreciate all the efforts that the guys working in the woods are making and the companies are making to protect the larger streams. For me, the crux of the issue has to do with what's written into the Oregon Forest Practices Act, which doesn't require buffers around the tiny little tributaries that wind up feeding those streams. And they can be aerial sprayed right over. And of course, the concern there is that a lot of these chemicals have a half-life that's long enough that within a few, in 5 days, they can be down into a fish-bearing stream or in a matter of a few hours and start to cause problems. The same applies to the increase in water temperature that we've seen in the fish-bearing streams, because the smaller tributary streams aren't protected by the Oregon Forest Practices Act, and so they're being denuded, they're heating up, and then that heats up the larger streams. But as I say, I do appreciate all the efforts that are being made, and I know that trying to be careful of every tiny tributary is a monumental task, no doubt.
What? These guys are taking the personal initiative to make it better. These gentlemen are taking the personal initiative to make this better. So what incentive, the others that don't, I don't know what they do, what incentive is there to help them be more conscious of what's going on out there? Well, you're there. What incentive is there? Is there not? Is there penalties, probably?
If they don't meet the minimum of the Forest Practices Act requirements, then yes, there's a penalty. There's a citation and a repair is done, and usually a monetary fine. So people can go to just what the law requires, or they can go above.
And above's their choice.
That would be their choice. So sometimes if I'm out walking with a logger and a landowner, and they're a non-industrial landowner, and you just point out kind of what Jesse's example of we only have brush here, let's leave a couple extra trees. And you point out why. Usually the landowners, once they understand, get it and are willing to leave a little bit more.
I was just wondering how to promote people to be better stewards.
I think you do that through education,
Yeah.
small woodland owner workshops. This is where extension forestry really plays a role. So say the Oregon Water trains the operators, the foresters and the landowners, the industrial foresters and the big foresters and the trained professionals, and then they take files in silviculture and continuing ed and
Todd, did you have something?
It's been covered a little bit, but it seems to me by your gentleman's expression of concern for the environment that a company which was less considerate would just plow through those trees you left and would take out, whatever they could, just get right up to the 60 feet. Well, and so isn't it telling us that the Forest Practices Act is inadequate to protect the streams?
If that logger goes through that and does damage, it's probably never going to work for that timber company again. You get fired by the warehouses, the hand stocks, the gamblers, they don't put up with it.
also we talked about sustaining SFI. That's a higher standard, that's a global standard that many of the industrial landowners are a part of and they sign up for. Mark talked about it on the Greenwood field tour, that's a higher standard than the Forest Practices Act. And so many of those companies want that certification. That's their social license to operate, they call it, and to sell their wood with a sustainability label on it to the Home Depots, and company, the log yards like that. And so the landowners have, the industrial landowners really have incentive to be good stewards of the land and to meet the Forest Practices Act and the requirements of SFI or FSC, which is what the Astoria Watershed uses. So there are different.
All our employees are SFI certified.
So if we look that up, we can see what that is?
Yes, SFI.
Actually, do you know if there's any private companies that are FSC in Clatsop County?
The only, I'm just thinking Astoria Watershed operates under FSC.
Okay.
So those have some metrics then that
Yes,
might
they
be
do.
used as in, Forest Practices Act, but then also mention these other metrics that could also be encouraged, might be a good one.
Could the county ask that, or demand that the companies cutting wood in our county comply with FFI or FFC? Pardon?
We're all required by the timber landowners.
By the landowners, but that's not the county protecting the,
Your county right now, what it says is to abide by the Forest Practices Act.
right.
And FSC or SFI would constitute a higher standard and probably put us in opposition.
Requires smaller clear cuts, more wildlife trees per acre. Those are just two examples.
Now, I think, and we have a commissioner in the room, so I'm looking at her. I mean, I think this is an area where we possibly could put incentives around things to say, companies that choose to be SFI or FSC certified, maybe they get some incentive from the county to keep doing that, but yeah.
Andy, although I appreciate the sentiment, I think your goal has already been achieved. I know that Hampton and Greenwood are both SFI certified. I can't, you guys are as well. I can't speak for Weyerhaeuser in the county, but that's the only person I don't know off the top of my head, and they're one of the smaller industrial landowners here. So, mission accomplished.
We can live, our work here is done.
I totally agree. The majority of the industrial timber companies are really trying. One of the stewardship foresters told me one of her best, incentive is to be qualified to go into the big box stores with their timber. But what we're not addressing is a smaller group, but has more territory. If you go over and look down at the South Slope, that's where I live and I look out at it every day, it has been wiped clean. I mean, even from 1.5 miles, I can tell nothing's growing. And it goes from Saddle Mountain all the way to the Warrenton Airport. And that area is dead. It's been compacted. They're essentially moving it into an agricultural operation, which is against the Forest Practice Act. They want to keep forests.
I drive that land all the time. They're in compliance.
It's not what,
Reforestation has been done. It's up to date.
but they plant them in corn rows.
The act doesn't say plant roots or corn rows.
They're, and they also are cutting them at 25-year rotation.
The Forest Practices Act doesn't put in an age restriction. That's a landowner's choice.
Yes. It points out the need, and it's even frustrating the Board of Forestry members. I had a quote from one of the board members that said, "We don't know what in the blank is going on. What is the compliance rate?" They had an independent study, and it wasn't what they said. That's all I know.
This year alone, I've done 300 inspections
do you believe that cutting trees at 25 years? I mean, I'm just. Yeah, well, all I'm trying to say is that is a very serious problem, and it points out the need to get to the Board of Forestry. They now have a fighting chance in terms of the makeup. There are 4 people on there who are really frustrated and want to do something. And if we could get the people to appear and express their concern, because we're just, it just horribly bothers me that we are a major contributor. They are, the for-profit industrial, Wall Street, whatever, are a major contributor to global warming.
You know that for a fact?
Yes. Yes, I know 2 independent studies came up, different routes come up with essentially the same answer.
I think I want to take a moment to just return us to, again, I might agree that there are things that the Board of Forestry could address, or the Forest Practices Act may have shortcomings, but we can't affect them, not in this body. I mean, we can again encourage change to happen. I think that's valid, and if members of the body want to try and include language to encourage that kind of change, I'm all for it. But I'd like us to try. You know, we've gone through 3 of like 20 policies if we want to get through them. I'd like us to try and move forward.
Just to sum up her global warming issue, it's been replanted and harvested after 25 years and replanted again. That's your best carbon sink right there. Right after they've been replanted, that's when photosynthesis is in its biggest effect and creating the biggest carbon sink there is for any greenhouse gases right then and there. When you start hitting that 25, 30-year mark, don't disagree with me. I was a forest management major before I became a logger. I know what I'm talking about here, and that is the biggest carbon sink there is a freshly planted clear cut, just to answer your question there.
Okay.
Probably go on all night.
Yeah. We could, yeah. So Ron could.
They sent a letter to me
Carol.
from the head of the corporation saying, well, we never sprayed.
I'm sorry. Honestly, we need to keep moving if we're going to get through this. We could have debates all night, but that's not what we're here for. Ron, do you have things from your liaison group for?
Number 4.
Thank you.
Division of forest lands will be permitted only upon a finding that the proposed division meets the following criteria. The proposed division will not diminish the potential for timber production, watershed protection, and fish and wildlife habitat. And B, the creation of new parcels will not materially alter the overall stability of the area's land use pattern.
Do you guys have any feedback on that particular one?
Well, yeah, we voted to retain the goal. I can't, just a second. Diane, what did Julia say about the template test when it was in, because they were trying to create, that's what it was. As long as you create the creation of new parcels will not materially alter the overall stability. And that's what Julia was talking about when she said they had to do the template test to meet that anyway. So that kind of takes care of itself, I thought.
Right, and the template test, though, doesn't deal with partitioning lands. It deals with building houses on lands that are in designated forest.
Gail, I actually had a question about this particular one, and especially in Part A, so division of lands, how does the planning department, do you have a test that you apply to applications for division that includes this at the moment?
Well, I will tell you that in the almost 2 years I've been here, we've not had an application to divide forest lands. We have had applications for template tests for new houses, and I don't believe that we that criteria is part of the template test, where we look at watershed protection. We do look at wildfire protection when the structure is built and making sure that it's built with fireproof roofing and has a clear defensible area around it. But we, as staff, are not looking at how a new house in a forest area will impact watersheds or things like that.
Do you know if this would be if someone came along and said, I want to divide this 1,000 acres of F80 into two 500-acre sections, do you have a test that you would apply?
We do not have a test. What we would do is ask the applicant to provide us with findings and documents or documentation that verifies that they're not going to impact timber production, watershed production, or habitat. So we put the onus back on the applicant who wants to make the partition.
What's the check on that? So if the applicant says, of course not, do you go along with it?
We call it the smell test, basically, or the smile test. If you could stand up in a public meeting and defend it without bursting into laughter because it's ludicrous. I mean, we're not trained scientists on staff, so we have to take the applicant's supporting materials as they're presenting it to be true. So that's
Jim?
Gail, I have to assume that you have some type of limitation on how close a leaching field, for instance, can be to a creek.
We do, and that comes out of environmental health, and don't quote me on the distance. I think it's 100 feet, but don't quote me.
Okay, so you do have some kind of, Andy was asking about litmus tests or whatever, and it may not be a planning question, but it is a question of allowing the applicant to build or to place a leaching field. So you do have some, essentially. I just wanted to confirm that.
Right.
Okay.
From, right, from non-aquatic vegetation.
I think when I read it, my main concern was that, so we've got the AF-20 and the F-38 and the F-80, right? And that someone might come in with a big parcel of F-80 and want to essentially change a portion of it to one of the smaller designations.
We don't have those designations anymore.
Okay.
Those designations were taken off the books decades ago.
Great. But so let's say they want to put a portion of their land into something more like agroforestry, which we wouldn't necessarily want to blanket stop people from doing that, but it would be less productive as timberland, right? So I feel like it would fail this test.
So right now, we're talking about 3 different land use processes. We're talking about division of land when you have a big chunk of land and you're splitting it into pieces. And then you're talking about building houses, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's a partition of land. And then I forget what the third thing was, that you're basically a zone change where you're going from a forestry use to a mixed use or straight agriculture. So this policy 4 is looking only at divisions of lands.
Okay.
That's all that it's looking at.
So you'd only apply, any test you had, you would only apply to that mechanism.
Well, I don't know if, there are policies in here that look at that later on, but right now, if we're going to focus on goal 4, then I think we should focus on goal 4, which is division of land. So if you're going to change the zoning on a piece of land, then you've got to go, depending on what you want to change it to, you may have to take a goal exception, which is a big process. It means that you're basically telling the state, we have a piece of resource land, whether it's forestry or agriculture, and we don't think we need it anymore, and we really need it for something else. So you should give us a waiver and let us change it to something that's not a protected category. So, and when you go through that, we're looking at, is there a need for it? Can it be put anywhere else? We're not going to look in a zone change necessarily at watershed protection or things like that. So, you can certainly, as a committee, make that recommendation so that we put policies in, that we look at these things and they become part of the zoning code, if that's what the committee would like to do. I think that maybe is what the question is you're actually asking.
Okay. Yeah, that's more
So.
probably. Any
clarifying question about that, and in the language there it says, proposed division will not diminish potential production or watershed protection and fish, wildlife habitat, and the creation will not materially alter. Is that on that parcel, or could, I understand, so the goal here is to maintain forests for forestry, and this is in division of land, which sounds like there might be a threat to that. And so looking at that and reading close, if I were to want to make a division and I saw a proposal will not diminish the potential for timber production, I can say Clatsop County is 95% timber forestry, it doesn't material change things. Or does that suggest that on this parcel, the division would materially blah, 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 blah? Do you understand what I'm saying?
So I think you can look at it both ways. Again, during the time, almost 2 years I've been here, we've not done a partition of land like that. So I don't know historically how the department, if they've done these things, has interpreted that particular provision. What you have to keep in mind with a partition is you're moving a line on a piece of paper. That's all that a partition is moving a line on a piece of paper.
I think the concern, mine certainly, would be steps towards conversion, like I brought about real estate investment trusts last time, about would that form of ownership incentivize converting forest land to something else any more than any other kind of ownership. And so I guess with this is different, I understand, you're helping me understand that, but it seems like when the steps towards changing land to do something else with it sometimes are incremental, and making big things smaller, I think maybe underneath what Andy's was questioning was that too, and just trying to avoid slippery slopes. But it doesn't sound like there's a problem. I don't mean to make problems where there's not.
So they have a minimum acreage for new parcels. So and it's 80 acres. That's the minimum. So if I come in and I have 200 acres, I can create an 80-acre piece and a 140-acre piece, and you're going to challenge my math skills on the fly here, or I can do 200 acres, or, however. So I guess the question would be that I would ask you is, if they meet the minimum required lot size, and they shift the lot line or the parcel line so that now instead of 100 acres and 100 acres, it's 110 acres and 90 acres. Look at that. 3 different types of 200, ways to get to 200. Does it make a difference? Will it harm a watershed?
Only if it's a move to a change of use, I think, is kind of.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
so I guess
changing.
my question to staff is changing the designations, in your experience, a step towards changing use? And I'm hearing that it isn't.
It depends on the lay of the land. Like, if you look at a topo map, and she says it's just drawing a line, but you know good and well that you can make certain land inaccessible, as you draw the line on the topo map. So I think, yes, it's very clearly you can screw up the operability of a piece of land by cutting it in two. Make it where you can't practically manage it as forest.
Yeah, and so those are the kind of things that I'm concerned about.
I've got a few. I've got Roger, Jan, Todd.
I have a piece I think is relevant under this particular goal, and that is there have been some communities where development has taken place that are off of the main water line that provides us water for the water. And at least one of these communities has had trouble having enough water supply during the summer months. And there was a study done at Oregon State by the
I'm sorry to derail. Does this have to do with division of land?
Well, I don't know exactly, because it's hard for me to follow everything that your requirements and so forth. But I was going to mention that the stream flows after an area has been clear cut have been shown to decline up to 50% for at least 50 years. So I think when a housing development or a parcel of land is being considered for housing, that should be looked at, what the recent history is of the forestry in that area.
Okay, thank you. Jan?
And I'm not sure if this pertains either, but Gail, bear with me just because in a previous lifetime, the county in which I lived allowed a lot of parcelization in foothills, and, our terrain is so rugged that it's not as amenable. But I can see in the future with the demand for housing here, pressures to, and this is policy, board policy 5, to take what land is buildable and for people to work that so they can do a subdivision or something. And I think I wouldn't want that to happen. I think our job here is to protect the forest land for sustainability, for not just timber production, but for all the things that it offers us. You don't see, in your experience, that pressure that goes from, okay, well, I'll cut up this 100-acre parcel and then I'll come in again 10 years from now and we just don't have the kind of big-time developers here or that kind of pressure that they have in other places. But we've seen what happens when people put subdivisions in the middle of forests, to California's great debt right now. But you don't see that kind of thing happening in this county. Am I correct?
Is that a question?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
a question.
Yeah, so when we talk about forest lands, keep in mind, there's a minimum 80-acre lot size. Big piece of property.
Yes, so you're not, but you can't come in later and carve that up.
So to do that, you have to pull it out of forestry, and you have to go to the state and say, okay, we're done being resource land. We want less restriction, we want to go to a non-resource land category. And that process is a goal exception. And a goal exception is not as easy as you fill out a piece of paperwork and hand it in, and we say, okay, you're now no longer forestry, you're residential agriculture 5, and you only need a 5-acre minimum lot size. It's not easy. You have to prove to the state that and Will can talk to this because he's looked at doing one. You have to prove that the reason you have to pull that land out of forest use or farm use is because there's no other land in the county that can be used for housing, that there's no other land that's available that's already zoned for what you want to do. It's a very, very high bar to cross, and it's expensive and it's time consuming, and it's not easy. And frankly, you would get a lot of pushback from the state, and you would, depending on what the proposal was, you'd probably get a lot of pushback from county staff.
Well, good, that's great.
But thank you, yeah.
It's not odd to say that these would be great ocean view lots.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, that, just what Robert said, you can't just, it's not a matter of, okay, well, we could make $2 million in one fell swoop, and we're just going to change everything. Oregon has a very strong system set up in terms of protecting its farm and forest lands, and so it's not like California.
I want to just ask a procedural question. We're now going through these goals, and our committee hasn't had a chance to do this yet, and I think that there are several committees that haven't. How will you be incorporating the findings of our committees that have not gone through this yet?
Okay, so the committees that have not met, there are 2 meeting next week, Southwest Coastal and Northeast. We will be, hopefully you will have done your homework and completed your worksheets, or you'll do so at the meeting, and then staff will collect those. I feel like we're running a classroom here, but we will collect your work and we will take it back. We will not grade it, but we will take all that and funnel that into the first round of drafts for the policy rewrites that we'll be working on over the next 3 months.
Okay, and we'll be doing this as a committee in our next meeting, which is...
next Wednesday?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, I can't speak to how your chair wants to run the meeting. That's what we've proposed on the agenda, but it's up to your chair to determine how he wants to run the meeting.
Thank you.
Jim, and then Cheryl.
I'd just like to make a follow-up comment on what Robert had mentioned. Notwithstanding the fact that petitioning is rather rare, It does say proposed division will not diminish the potential for, say, timber production, watershed, et cetera, et cetera. I have to assume that you have some kind of criteria that you use. Like, for instance, as was brought up about the timber production, it's very clear that how you petition a land may or may not affect the ability to log one of those two petitions. So this is more of a statement, because since it's never or only once in the last 2 years been enforced, you may or may not have that kind of guidelines. My suggestion is that you develop these guidelines when when and if you eventually will get a petition.
So those are the type of recommendations that you should be making as your committee, that should be policies that go into the comp plan. That within 5 years, county planning staff develops criteria, measurable criteria to determine, X, Y, and Z, or
How do
things
we
like
make
that.
a motion?
Say, I move to,
I move that, and then say it.
Okay. I move that the committee adopts the proposal that the staff will develop in reasonable time. 5 years, is that reasonable?
It would be 5 years from, the date of the comp plan. That's a fair number.
5-year time to develop specific criteria for goal number 4.
Policy number.
Excuse me, policy 4 of goal 4.
Specific criteria. Read that again, please, Don.
You look a little puzzled.
Read that again, please.
yeah, Jim, could you restate that again?
Well, he spelled out policy 4, which deals specifically with petitions.
The proposal is that the staff will, in 5 years from the completion of the plan, they will develop specific criteria for it's not goal 4, what is it? Policy 4 of goal 4 for evaluating land proposed for petition.
I
mean, you're going to have to do
understand.
something anyway. I mean, whether it's written down or ad hoc, but you're going to have to go through a process. And my suggestion is write it down first. Okay.
Sorry, I'm wordsmithing here.
And it's been moved and seconded.
Yes. Jim, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes?
Actually, sorry,
I just
Jim.
want to quote from the Oregon Department of Forestry Administrative Rules of Forest Practice Act that was handed out a couple meetings back. And it's under 527630 policy rules. And there's a statement here. To encourage forest practices implementing the policies, it is declared to be in the public interest to vest in the State Board of Forestry exclusive authority to develop and enforce statewide and regional rules pursuant to ORS 527710, and to coordinate with other state agencies and, I underline this, local governments which are concerned with the forest environment. So to me, that's a statement of what we are encouraging to be done. And they even have rules about them having, they shall adopt and enforce practice rules to reduce risks of serious bodily injury or death from rapidly moving landslides, in the slopes and et cetera. So we have a role, the government has a role in this county to provide that input and coordinate with them.
Okay, Jim.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Jim, let me restate the motion, and as I've recorded it and sort of wordsmithed it a little bit. So, Jim, so the motion on the floor is that staff shall develop within 5 years of the publication of the comprehensive plan specific criteria for measuring compliance with Goal 4.
Policy?
Policy
Policy 4, thank you.
of Goal 4.
Policy 4 of Goal 4. And that was seconded by Cheryl. Does that capture? Okay. Todd?
Jim, would you give us an example of what you have in mind by specific criteria?
Well, I have to say, I am more familiar with the forestry side, the timber side of it. So, for instance, if you have an area that it's difficult to access for timber removal, and if you have a petition in such a way that it makes accessing that one portion of the petition inaccessible, then you're definitely limiting your production. Another type is if, depending upon where you are, the operation, the physical operation of logging may not be possible according to how the petition is, the land is petitioned. It's really access.
It's all about access?
That for timber, yes. Watershed might be some other things.
Does that make sense to you, Gail, as an explanation, and does that follow with what you would take this as a directive to do?
I understand what the directive is, and once it's adopted into the comp plan, then we would go through a separate process with public input to determine what those criteria should be, how they're measured, and how they're implemented. So I think I understand.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion that staff shall develop within 5 years of the publication of the comprehensive plan specific criteria for measuring compliance with policy 4 of Goal 4 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed to the motion signify by saying no. Hearing none, the ayes have it, and the motion that staff shall develop within 5 years of the publication of the comp plan specific criteria for measuring compliance with policy 4 of Goal 4 is adopted. Thank you. Cheryl.
I have a follow-up question to Todd's process question. The Northeast group met November 7th and began our discussion on Goal 4, and then we meet again on December 10th, and we'll continue our discussion on Goal 4. I doubt that we will complete our discussion of Goal 4, so I'm following up on Todd's process question. And I know at one point in some of the handouts that we had, there was a possibility, Gail had written on there, that there might be a formation of a forestry subgroup to continue to work on this. I'm wondering if that's still out there.
I'm still thinking about it. I have not put it out yet to the groups. I'm still chewing on that idea. What I would like to do, though, is we have a 33-month process, and to keep it relatively at the 3-year mark, we could spend 3 years just on Goal 4. And that is really a very big concern. It's a big topic. It's worthy of a lot of discussion, but we also have 14 other goals we need to cover in the next 2.5 years. I will put that survey out to see if there is interest. The way I'm currently envisioning it is if you make any committee too big, it's not productive. What I would like to see is one representative each from certain types of forest organizations and industries, and then probably 2 of the committee members from the various committees, not 2 from each, but 2 overall, so that we have a committee of maybe between 5 and 7 to keep it small size. But again, I'm still working out some thoughts in my head before I put it out for further discussion.
Does that fully answer your question, Cheryl? Okay.
It's an ongoing process.
It is.
To bureaucratize it excessively, I think will undermine the overall process.
Do we want to continue with discussion of policy 5? Ron, did you have feedback from your group, or do we want to start, Pat, you immediately started to raise your hand?
As I read it, saw that, just maybe wording, I think the intent is to make the uses conditional, and it starts off by saying, oh, it is permitted, and then with some caveats, and it says refers to the conditional use, maybe that they are a conditional use in that zone. As I read it, it sounded more sort of positively phrased, that might give someone encouragement. Clustering on forest land zone may be permitted, but permitted conditionally is what it says in the second part of that. I guess maybe.
Those zones they mentioned don't exist
Maybe change those around. I wouldn't want to let, you know what I mean, just a little.
Yeah, the two zoning districts being referenced don't even exist anymore. Everything is F80, so there's some wordsmithing, obviously, that needs to be done to bring that up to date. So if I understand what you're saying is in the second sentence, you want it to read, the non-forest development is a conditional use.
But no, the first sentence, I mean, it sounds like the first sentence is a conditional use also, or is it not?
Well, the first sentence really isn't relevant anymore because those two zoning districts
But I
don't.
just changed to a different number?
They're changed to F80. Well, we have an AF zone and we have an F80 zone right now.
Is correct.
So,
Can I cluster non-forest residences on those?
yes, there is a
They're
way.
subject to the siting standards?
Yes,
Okay. So there will be something in there, just the acreages will be changed.
right.
Okay. And is it a conditional use to cluster non-forest residences? Or
I
am I-
believe it is, but without my code right in front of me, but I would say yes.
And it was a small thing, but it seemed like the first sentence was kind of a softer no, and the second sentence was a harder no, and I guess I just wanted to be consistent throughout. It's conditional use versus likely to.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, go back to you.
What provisions are there for protecting these kind of developments from forest fire?
The thing that we look for spark retardant chimney, I don't know, some sort of chimney device, and the spark retardant roofs, clear space around the buildings.
Jim, I apologize. That's one.
Yeah. And Gail, is there any kind of limit on the size of the clusters? I mean, at what point a cluster of homes becomes like a hamlet or a small community unto themselves? Is there anything in the existing code now that addresses a planned development is really well, actually, this will end up being an unplanned development.
Right, so I think I understand what you're asking. So when we do template tests, we basically take 160 acre square and we center it on a piece of property, and then we look at all the parcels that fall into that 160 acre square. And of that, there have to be so many parcels that have houses on them that were created before or built before a certain period of time. But there's not necessarily a limit on that. So if you've got your piece of property and you set your 160 acre square down on that property and you say, okay, there's 10 other residences around me within that area, and I'm number 11, you don't get to go because we're limited to 10. And is that what you're asking?
That's what I'm asking in
Okay.
terms of, because I can see a small cluster just growing haphazardly and not have the infrastructure there to adequately serve the homes.
You could create a brand-new, rural hamlet as a planning process.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. I mean, to me, it seems like having a few homes is fine, but there is a certain point where you have to think about some kind of infrastructure to put into place to have more of a logical organization of water and sewer, for instance.
Well, there is no water, there is no sewer.
Well, that's part of the issue. It's like, if they grow too large, I see as a potential danger of not having the infrastructure in there.
Okay, so this is a very detailed, but I just want to clear up because I don't think we're talking about the same thing. So with a template test, you're still looking at forest land. So again, you know, we do deal with smaller pieces of forest land that were created when we had the 20 and 38 acre minimum, but a lot of these are bigger pieces as well and can be, you know, much larger than 20 or so acres. In the areas where you're finding this land, you are typically not going to see, nor do we encourage, nor do we want to promote the urbanization of it by running out water lines and sewer lines. People are still required to put in septic tanks and get permits for those. People are required to provide water somehow. Usually it'll be through a well, but we don't want to pour water lines in from some city and into the rural areas. And if you want to do that, then, and you want to run water lines and you want to run sewer lines out there, then you are basically going to take a goal exception, and it's going to be to goal 14, which is urbanization. And the whole point of protecting the forest lands and the farmlands is because you want to encourage development in incorporated areas. That's why cities have urban growth boundaries, and they're looking at a 20-year period of when they need to supply more housing. And you don't want to necessarily encourage the running of water lines and sewer lines out into the hinterlands.
Yeah, no, that's, I understand how that's.
And roads are required as part of the development. They have to provide access, and it has to get signed off by the fire department.
So is the limitation the 160 acre that you plop over the, I don't know, the center, the first
it
house
should be
or whatever?
centered on it. Well, it's centered on the lot.
Okay, is that the limitation? They can't go to another 160 acre parcel and develop another cluster?
The 160 acres is basically the template that we lay over the property. So if this is my property, even if my property's 10 acres, I take a 160 acre overlay, think of a cardboard cutout, and I put it down in the center of my property. Anything that's around me that falls in that 160 acres is fair game for me to use to determine whether or not somebody gets to build a house on their property. And that comes out of state law. That's how
And you
we
totally bypass that and use state law to do what was called rural problem solving, where you throw out the rules and you can create a hamlet where it's not otherwise allowed by state law.
Well, state law, they passed a new law this year that kind of cracks back down on the willy-nilly how you place your 160 acres. And so it's got to be centered on the property.
Rural problem solving is history and no longer allowed. Like there's the idea of, gee, you could do something at Miles Crossing, you could do something at Sunset Beach, you could do something somewhere else to create a little hamlet, which seemed more rational at the time than having sprawl.
Mm-hmm.
And it was official, DLCD sponsored.
You're talking rural communities?
I am talking, it was called Rural Problem Solving Phase 2 for Classic Plains as an example. And it was DLCD sponsored, and the idea is so that don't feel constrained that we can't do things, that you can do things that are not allowed, according to, you can think outside the box. And that's just one of these curiosities that has happened, sitting in the same place down at the Pacific Range, going through this process. And it's like, maybe ask the LCD, hey, anyone around, like the planner for Gerhardt?
Carol?
Yeah, she was part of that rural problem solving. And it's, and I think it responds to Jim's query of, can you do this? Well, the object was, of course you can, if you use the rules that allow you to ignore the rules. And which was a DLCD program. So it's worth asking, because it was to get across the barriers. And people, hated land use because you couldn't do things. They said, of course you can. You can totally think outside the box.
And the whole point of having this template rule is so that we keep homes near other homes and not build new communities in the middle of the forest.
Yeah.
I'm raising the possibility that there is a procedure that's unfamiliar to you and Gail, that may or may not still exist, but it was called Rural Problem Solving, whatever, and it was a DLCD sponsored, and it addresses directly, hey, Jim asking, can you do this? Can we go create a brand new hamlet out along the river in Jewel, maybe where there used to be a logging camp, and see, wouldn't that make sense? They used to do it, can we do it again? Because there's sure demand, and better to have it clustered than to have it sprawling over a bigger area.
Gail, can you or staff give us feedback on whether that's a pertinent concern for us going forward?
Yep.
And Jan, you've been waiting on.
Well, I would just suggest that it seems like we need to turn this, maybe we can eliminate the first sentence completely, and instead of saying this non-forest development is permitted conditionally, say non-forest development is discouraged unless it does not result in the loss of forest lands, nor does diminish or interfere with forest uses. I mean, because we're really not you're saying discouraged, but you're saying it positively here somehow? Yeah, it just seems strange. And if, in fact, we no longer have those two zone districts, why even have that sentence about clustering non-forest? Other than maybe some of those parcels still exist? But if your point is to discourage further residential development in forest areas, why even have that?
Jan, is that a motion?
I move that we remove the first sentence.
Yep.
And that, say, non-forest development is discouraged unless it does not result in loss of forest lands or diminish or interfere with forest uses.
Can you add 3 or 4 more double negatives into that?
But I do believe that this particular policy is directed for clustering.
Wait, let me see, is there a second, sorry, Jim, is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay. Jan, do you want to speak to that motion? Further than you already have?
Well, other than trying to remove the double negatives, well, I just think you're saying that non-forest development is discouraged unless it can be done without the loss of forest land or diminish or interfere with forest uses. Seems like that's what
I didn't read it quite that way, that it was meant to discourage. There are state statutes already in place that there is a process that they can legally go through to do that.
But do we want to discourage it? You're saying we can't because the state already has.
Well, the state has a way to do that. I don't know how you discourage someone from utilizing a state law.
Obfuscating?
Pardon?
Obfuscating?
You could do that. And the whole point is to be clear, and if they have a right to go through that process and they meet the criteria, we have a right to approve them, or we have an obligation to approve them. It's not a right, it's an obligation. And, people who will not pass that test, we discourage them from even applying because there's no point in them wasting their money and their time.
Yeah.
But if someone meets the criteria and even if they don't meet the criteria, they still have the right to apply.
But it still seems to me like a very strange sentence. It's permitted conditionally because it does not result.
I think
if it does not result, maybe.
Because it's not as clear cut as if you're in Arch Cape or an RA1 zone where you come in and say, I want to build a house. And we have no criteria to evaluate the placement other than cut and dried things, which are setbacks, building height, lot coverage. So here you're looking at something that's a bit more subjective where you are, and that's why it's conditional, is because we are basically looking at it on a case-by-case basis and saying, okay, you have this property, you're going to build a house. Okay, you're a little close to the stream here. Yeah, you meet your setbacks, but maybe we know that, or we suspect that there's maybe some fish habitat there or something. Move your house a little bit further away, or something along those lines. I did not read Policy 5 as trying to discourage housing, but that was just my interpretation of what I read. So.
I think Jan's probably trying to change the,
I'm sorry?
I think I would have taken her motion as trying to change that. Whether that's the will of the body or not, I don't know, but I.
Discouraging it rather than.
Yeah, she's actively wanting to discourage it.
Right, and I understood her to say that that's basically what it does now, but not as strongly.
Yeah. It's an awkward sentence.
Does staff, is it read okay for, Gail, does that read all right to you? I mean, as written in Plannerese, does that express what you can kind of tell where we're going here. We're trying to avoid slippery slopes and not encourage. What do you think about that?
Again, this is coming back to, a lot of it is coming out of state law. So we have basically taken, at the time this was written, a lot of this is straight out of ORS. So if, I don't know how we go about telling people, we discourage you from utilizing the state rule that's available to you, because we really don't want you to build in the forest lands. And I'm not saying that it's right to build in the forest lands or wrong, but I'm saying that there's a state rule that people have a right to utilize. And there's a due process issue if we start saying, we won't accept your application, even though the state says we should do it or have to do it.
So.
I think there are legal issues with that. I think that, zoning, as you know, is the whole issue is by right. And if you have a right, you can't discourage it. You can't discourage it. You can change it, but if it's a right.
And we can't change it.
And we have an obligation to honor that.
We can't change a right that's given by the state either. Gail, can I ask a question about then the relevance of 5 as policy altogether? If you're suggesting that this is essentially an area where we're constrained by state law, like, are we just saying in this policy that we're going to follow state law?
It's basically saying that, but I think it does more, it's trying to explain why we're even considering or allowing the clustering of non-forest residences. So, I mean, if you could probably take out the whole thing, because all it's saying is, if you're going to do your non-forest residence, you have to cluster it, which is already required. And it's telling me that the reason we're making you cluster is because, and the reason it's a conditional use is because if you design it right, it really should have minimal, if any, impact. So
we are agreeing with the goal of the state law, presumably, in that instance.
What about changing because to if? Non-forest development is permitted conditionally if properly designed and decided it does not result.
I think that would be fair.
I have a concern. I raised my original question not because I'm against clustering. I think that it makes sense in the rural areas. But my question is, to what extent does clustering become to such a large extent that you're, in this case, impacting forest lands? Do you have any guidelines on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of like focusing in on not only goal 4, but specifically this policy. I mean, When does clustering become too large that it's impacting forest lands? That's really my basic question.
Gail, did you indicate the template test allows 10 domiciles per 150 acres?
No, so no, that wasn't what I was trying to imply. So when we do a template test, we take my piece of property, okay?
Yeah.
My own forest land, it's 10 acres, okay? For whatever reason, it's ended up being 10 acres. I want to put a house on it now. So, and I know up the road there's some houses and there's some houses over here, but I don't know if they're clustered densely enough for me to qualify. So we take that 160 acre cutout, we put it on top of my 10 acres, and we see how many of those houses that are sprinkled around me fall into that 160 acres. If there's enough houses, and I think it's, depending on, and there's a lot of variables here, and I think it deals with, is it soil type? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. But, you know, there's criteria, so if you have to meet so many houses in that 160 acre area were built before January 1st of 1993 or whatever the date is. So you're looking to see, is it historically already kind of sprinkled with houses? And that's part of the test. So it's not that there's a limit on the number of houses, but you have to have so many houses already built to be.
So, yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
Wouldn't zoning take care, answer your question? Because whether it's RE1, 2, or 5, would tell you how many houses this area can support. Does that answer your question?
No, but this is forest land, so.
This is forest land.
Yeah, it's not residential.
Yeah,
So are you saying that there's no,
That's not what this this policy is addressing. It's grandfathering in some of the previous homes and whether you could.
well, the homes are already grandfathered in.
Okay, right.
So it's not a question of your grandparents built a house in 1910. The question is, it's 2019 and now I want to build a house.
Right.
Okay, so.
I understand that, right.
And this is not cluster development, this, you were just trying to find, there's a, you know, there's already houses.
So you're looking, it's multifaceted, there's parts to it. So the first step is to figure out how many houses have already been built around me that qualify, that were built prior to that date that's in the code. So if I pass that hurdle, and I've got enough development around me that says, okay, another house is fine, you've got enough development around you, there is sort of a development pattern already established. So then the next test is, okay, I can't take on my 10-acre piece, if my neighbor's house is here, 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 and I say, well, I don't want to build that close to my neighbors, I'm going to put mine as far away on my 10-acre piece as I can, that's not going to fly. You've got to cluster it as close as possible to the other development that's around you. So the policy, the state statute actually requires and encourages clustering. So
essentially, this isn't really taking land out of forest zone, because quite frankly, it's really not commercially available forest if you're going to have if you already have a cluster of homes. Be very difficult to do.
you can do forced activities on.
This is a little bit of a trap, because if you say you can do that, at what point can you not do that? That's getting back to what are the guidelines you would use to say there are too many homes, you can't do that anymore, or there are too many homes, you have to change it from forest land to a residential zone.
No.
Do you know, you see what I'm saying? It's like,
Okay, yes, so I understand where you're going. So the whole point of the template test is not to circumvent the rules and say, hey, look, we got 28 houses now, and now we don't want to be forestry anymore. That's the whole point, is that you go through this laborious test, and at the end of it, you still have to record documents that say you understand that you are living next to forest land with forest land, and that you are not going to do anything that's going to impede the practices. So the goal is, and you can do forestry activities on parcels of land, what, 1-2 acres, you can do all sorts of forestry activities. Yeah. So, to say that my 10-acre piece and my neighbor's 80-acre piece and my neighbor's 20-acre piece and my other neighbor's 20-acre piece with the 4 houses between us. Now suddenly, there will be no more logging activity or timber harvesting or anything forestry activities going on. It's not correct.
So I'm going to remind folks, we have a motion on the table. Do we have any further discussion on the motion, which is to delete sentence 1 and to alter sentence 2 to non-forest development is discouraged unless it does not result in the loss of forest lands and does not diminish or interfere with forest uses? Any further discussion on that motion?
Does that motion mention clustered?
It removed the first sentence, which was
And
where
that is
clustering
the
was.
sentence in which clustering of non-forest homes is mentioned?
Correct.
And that's the subject of this, is it not?
Yes.
And so are we just eliminating the subject of goal 5, or of clustering 5?
That could be a concern.
Pardon?
That may be a valid concern.
Yeah.
If there's no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of removing sentence 1 and amending sentence 2 to read non-forest development is discouraged unless it does not result in the loss of forest lands and nor does it diminish or interfere with forest uses, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed to the changes signify by saying no.
No.
The noes have it, and the motion fails. Okay, any further discussion on policy 5? Gail, is it reasonable to expect that staff will amend to exclude the non-applicable zones?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Ron, I might ask, since we're pushing through our time here, do you have other items that your committee specifically spoke to? Other policies that you wanted to change or alter, or?
Fifteen. Policy 15.
15.
Forest landowners shall be encouraged to actively pursue methods of complete utilization of wood fiber left on the ground after harvesting.
Yes. Did you have a suggested change or question about that?
Fiber left on the ground. This was the, actually, I may be confused here, but we were talking about, I am confused. We were talking about chipping, wood chipping versus burning. That's a,
Yeah, that was Ginger brought that up.
yeah, that was, whether it's feasible. Good. I said,
A little bit.
yeah.
Both are allowable under laws, landowner preference, whether you want to chip your forest slash or to burn it. Chipping and talking with a local operator company that does some of that work, the market is a very small profit in this, and so if you're a market, like Wanna Mill might be a buyer of your chips, just as an example. If you're close enough that you can make it profitable, then it pays to do it. We can't get the chip trucks up to all the landings because the curves are too tight. And the chip trucks don't bend like a log truck bends around some of the curves in the roads. So not all the roads or all the units are not accessible by force. And then some of the chipping is just done up on the ridge tops where it's the slash is accessible easily. You have a lot of labor cost in getting that slash through the chipper, because you've got an excavator picking it up, feeding the chipper blows in the chip truck drives it to the, say, Wanna Mill. So my understanding is if fuel costs go up, it doesn't happen. If the supply, buyer isn't there, and it's a pretty tight radius too. The slash to the end user has to be usually within about 50 miles to be profitable. Anybody want to add to that?
I have a-
What I know about it.
I have a question, because this is the first time I contemplated was today. And then the idea of just blowing it back out on the earth, does that work? Does that work?
They're trying it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the exact operations that are doing that. But one of the issues but one of the issues is that you create finer fuels too, and that has to be a consideration. Removing the slash does reduce fire danger out there, and those smaller, finer fuels are the ones that will catch fire quickly or quicker, and they'll burn faster. So just putting the slash back out on the ground has other issues.
And chipping in place is just an expensive way to do nothing.
Absolutely.
Would it inhibit the growth of whatever was planted?
It may.
Could.
May, I would say.
Yes.
Oh.
My experience with timber or the planters, that if there's too much brush on the land and you've got a danger and an issue, and those seedlings don't grow very well or they're not deep enough.
Right, unless you remove all the timber and then go down, so it would add.
Yeah.
Just comment on that interface we discussed at the last meeting. We use chipping as an alternative to burning slash piles in proximity to homes. It does cost more, obviously, to do that.
Robert?
Just to fill up any gap in my memory, this is directed to John. The old idea of pulling out the stumps and hauling them off was tried for a while and stopped, as I recall. Do you recall? Yes. Pardon?
It's usually not done.
I understand, but I was wondering, just briefly, why? Because it was tried. It was one of the Warden Fiber ideas. They have these big long trucks filled with stumps that had been removed from logging operations. And it was done for a while, then it wasn't done, and I just wondered, obviously the economics weren't there.
The only instances I'm familiar with something like that is use of in biofuels, either as a direct burning of those residual wood products, including stumps, for heat generation as a power source, or I know there have been some experimentations with residuals and actually converting them into a liquid fuel. And I think that there's some benefit in using the larger wood mass in that process versus branches. It may have been related.
It's like the 15, 20 years ago that I recall the big long
Restoration
trucks.
Ron? Yeah.
The way that conversation came up was with the Ginger was talking about they had a burn pile, and it went over some great distance, 5 acres over, and burnt that from the sparks, whatever. But that's how we got onto the chipper idea, was to see if there was a way to, and Tim, that's what, in specific things, you could do that, I imagine, to safeguard the fire thing.
Do you have, or did your group have suggested language to change, or was that to encourage keeping that policy in?
That was a retainer.
Yeah, it sounds like that policy is already sort of directed in that way. Okay.
That's just how it was laid in.
I would say, Andy, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Tim, under the nomenclature, I think that policy actually, the word utilization wouldn't apply to the idea of chipping and leaving on site. Utilization, I think, specifically is directed at the removal of those residuals for some sort of human use.
Yeah.
So if that was your goal, you might want to tweak that one.
Thank you for the input there. Cheryl?
I would request that we return to the agenda with the thought that there are over 20 policies, and this evening we have discussed 5 of them. So obviously, we're not going to get Next up on the agenda is public comment, which I think is important. And then I was wondering if also maybe we could have a sort of final comment from the folks at the table. We won't meet together again for 3 more months, and obviously we are not finished with forestry, so.
Sure.
I have a question on policy 6 there. It's just, I wonder, where it says the designation of new park and recreation areas, campground, et cetera, on forest land shall require an assessment of public need. Does that really mean on F80 zone lands? Or, just to clarify, I happen to have some OPR land that is heavily forested. I presume it's not talking about that, but it certainly is forest land, even though it's called OPR. And I'm just wondering, does that word forest land will need to be narrowed to industrial, F80 zone or something? What are they really trying to say there that you have to ask about it? Policy.
I'm not sure that I understand.
Policy 6 is saying any recreation areas, campgrounds, on forest land shall require an assessment of public need for them.
Right.
Does that include forest land that is zoned OPR? It's not trying to be a little bit, I'm trying to need to change a word. I have forested OPR.
Yeah. So the zoning is going to dictate basically what use is going to be allowed in what zone. So if OPR allows it, you still want to keep it as forest lands if it's a forested area. I think because you do want to have that evaluation of need. I think that's important.
But you have to have that evaluation, or can you just go ahead and have a campground on open space parks and recreation plan?
Well, without my code right in front of me, I can't tell you if it's a type 1 use or a conditional use. If it's type 1, it's permitted, and we're basically going to issue you a permit over the counter. So I think that
Is there a clash here?
I don't know that there's a clash.
Circle it and go home.
Well, I think it's worth looking at. Again, I did not bring my zoning code with me. I didn't plan to discuss zoning issues tonight, so that was my oversight. But.
The Parks and Rec Committee, the advisory committee, is taking a second, or is taking a new look at what is a very, very old, I think it's 15-year-old parks master plan. So we are probably, and we know that we are increasingly want to provide outdoor recreation areas in rural places in the county. So I think this is a really important policy to take a real focused look at. When I saw that in the forest lands goals, I was a little confused because Hampton is about to give us a bike trail. I've been talking it up with somebody before. But so, and I mean, look at the great thing we did with Greenwood, so I just would love to have this group really think about this policy and what it should require, because it's also going to be part of another goal that we are increasing. We want to increase resources for rural recreation.
Thanks, Dan.
Please stand.
So conscious of Cheryl's request, Robert, do you mind dialoguing with staff about implications for that and then possibly coming back to us next meeting with some?
Absolutely, no need. I've already passed it off to Gail.
Okay, fair enough. So let's move on to public comment unless there is objection from the group. None noted. Anyone from the public want to bring up topics for us to discuss or consider as we go forward? I think it's fair to give you 10 or 15 minutes here as a group to bring up anything that you came to talk to us about tonight, or concerns that you've seen that you'd like us to address in this process.
I'm Diane Jetty from LC Jewel. The policy number 2.
Yes.
It refers to policies 19, 20, and 21, which have been eliminated. So I think just keeping the first sentence will clear that one as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow the question. I was taking notes and didn't listen.
She was referring to, in policy 2, it refers to 19, 20, and 21, which do set out the F20, F38. That's what you were discussing, that those are in effect eliminated now, so perhaps we should alter that language as well. But is that something we can count on staff to change as well?
Yeah, so the reference in policy number 2, we would correct. What Lewis and Clark committee, the committee recommended was actually deleting policies 19, 20, and 21 because they were irrelevant now.
Okay. Does that address your concern?
Yeah, I just think policy 2 is empty now. My next concern is just a general one for everybody, and that is we just have an alphabet soup here of, acronyms. And I would really love it if there was a, oh my gosh, flow chart that showed me the state was up here, the county is here, wherever regional government fits in, not that we have one, but, and how the Department of Forestry fits. If this type of problem comes up, which rule set are you under? So a person would actually know how to navigate through all this stuff.
I think that sounds like a good idea.
What the acronyms
My
are.
third thing is to say, and I will take this personally, okay, that we can change all this stuff. If we don't enforce it, it doesn't matter a big. We need to get enforcement. Come to Christmas tree Road. That's it.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
And any other public comment?
I think, healthy forests are an important draw for tourism, no question. And healthy streams also are a draw. I just feel like the word climate change isn't mentioned at all. And, for example, controlled burns are encouraged now. And if we put a bunch of campsites in, what if these people are careless with their little campfires? So somehow that's got to be addressed.
Thank you.
This is a comment for everyone. State Forest has recently put out their draft for their forest management plan. It's open for public comment and through January, so I'd encourage all of you. This is for all the state forests statewide, but obviously Clatsop County Forest and Clatsop State Forest is a large player here. So look at that forest management plan, because I was looking at the old plan, and a lot of the topics we're going to cover in this process, if you want to know how State Forest is going to do it on their property, it's in their plan. So go read and comment on that.
Where do we find it?
Thank you.
It's probably on the website, Oregon Department of Forestry. It'll be the forest management plan for the state forest.
Thank you.
Can I add to that, the habitat conservation plan is also just out. In fact, if I could have been in 2 places today, I would have been in Portland for that. But it's the habitat conservation plan, which addresses many of the issues that we're concerned about with our forest lands. So we'll look at that too.
Thank you.
Also on the
Pam, was that in draft form or is that a final?
Although it's just the very first draft.
Okay, thank you.
It's just the beginning of the process.
There used to be an ODF employee at Astoria whose title included recreation. Does anyone still exist that has recreation as part of their title?
Yes, currently it's combined with reforestation. I don't know under the new state forest organizational structure how that's playing out. Things are in flux right now a little bit.
Thank you.
But we do still have a recreation unit at the Astoria district.
Yes.
I've just got a quick comment, and it's more of a plug than a comment, I guess. These are some of the forest management topics that folks have brought up today are pretty complicated issues, and what applies in one case may not apply in all, and perceived impacts may be a little different than actual impacts. Fortunately, there are lots of very smart people who've really dedicated their life to studying these issues, and the science, it's out there. It can be a little hard to penetrate sometimes, but we have a great new employee at OSU Extension here in town in the forestry department, and I would love to volunteer him to help translate some of those scientific issues for the committee here. I'd really just encourage you, as you're hearing this input from those of us in the committee, don't take my word for it or don't take someone else's word for it. Go straight to the source and verify some of the things that you're hearing and that folks are concerned about, so you know exactly what the kind of realistic implications here in our county might be.
Thank you. It was awfully nice to have the Browning turn out tonight. Thank you. Yeah. It was awfully nice having the Browning contingent here this evening. Nice turnout.
I do want to yeah.
One quick question, Gail,
Sure.
you were here at the last meeting we were at, and there was a lady who talked about her property being impacted by the clear cutting because she moved in right next to a clear cut, and we were trying to figure out a way to inform these people of it. So when a house that house must be in a cluster, I guess, from reading, getting to hear this, and I don't know that for sure, but if the house is sold within a cluster, is it possible to get the rules that ODF has and everything to those people that sell properties within those clusters that are actually forest land? So they know what they're buying. Well, I know, it all depends on the realtor, but you don't know. Is it possible for the county, when that piece of property within that cluster, or that forest lands, so that they know? It's just a question. I guess I'm just asking because that was a big topic at the last meeting, but I didn't understand that it could have been forest land that they had bought.
Oh, and it might not have been. It could be that I've got a residential ag piece and it butts up against some F80 forestry land, and that is probably much more common than people think. I've been actually talking to Brady Gert, who is on the Elsie Jewell committee now, and was it him who brought it up? No, it was Charles Dice who brought it up and did that. So he and I are going to be talking about that, how we can do it. It's probably something we have to pull in a couple other departments to help us with, because they know when the property's, taxation knows when properties sell in the clerk's office, so.
It was just a thought.
Yeah, and it's always good, the more information you can get out to people about what they're buying, the better off, I think. Yeah.
There was some pushback about having your properties in a tsunami inundation zone, having that on the property. So there's definitely not universal joy in having that on there. I think conversations with realtors and that is a good due diligence.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for coming tonight and for your public comment. It's invaluable for us to get feedback from the public as we're doing this and to hear expertise from people who have it in areas we don't. So thank you all. I do want to make sure that we take the time to do business that we need to do, which includes scheduling our next meeting. We've got a couple months we're going to skip here. Is that correct, Gail? We're going to skip 3 months?
Yeah, so what we would like to do as staff is to give us time to begin drafting some of the rewrites of the policies, goals 1 through 4, and start with those. we need to have a little break from you, and I think, as Julia put it, last month, yeah, we're taking some time off from y'all, but we love you, but, so we do need that break to give staff some time, and also to start giving you materials for Goal 5. We gave you your Goal 5 books last month, and then throughout this month, January, February, and March, we'll be sending you other materials dealing with quarry and mining, wildlife habitat, historic resources, watersheds, all the things, scenic vistas that are covered as part of Goal 5. And then we would like to begin meeting back again in April. We can bring back the revisions, the draft rewrites, and then start working on Goal 5. So what we would request tonight is that you set a date for your April meeting. Typically, you've been meeting, I believe, the third Thursday of the month at 4, and if that continues to work, we can do that.
So that is April the 16th? Is that correct, Gail? That's what I have in my calendar anyway.
Yeah, that would be the 16th.
Thursday? Is there anyone who has objections to our next meeting being set for April 16th? That's the third Thursday in April. Any conflicts, issues with that date?
Same time?
Same time, same place? 4 p.m.?
Okay.
April 16th, yes. Gail, did you have other business for us tonight?
I do not, thank you.
Okay. Let's see, I'll start with Ron. Any closing comments from the committee?
I would like to thank you all for your patience for me. From my previous life, this is all a big learning curve. That's why I was telling, I think it was Ginger today, our new member, and trying to affect change with this, I'm still working on that. But what I told her, I says, there is so much to learn here of how people do stuff and how to live out here in unification. And that's really impressive. That's about it.
Thank you, Ron. Okay. Todd?
No, I'm just concerned that we have seemingly only touched the surface of all of this, and we're now passing it off to you guys, and it just seems that we may be rushing the forest practices part too much.
Just wait till we get to rush Goal 5. Jan?
No, I have no comments.
No, I don't have any.
Robert? No, thank you. Cheryl?
I wanted to say that I really appreciated the forest conversation. There were a variety of people there, a variety of viewpoints, and I just thought it was very positive. And as I have said previously, our property is farm forest. We're tiny. We're 12.8 acres out of Brownsmead. And we have selective cut on our land, and we have replanted on our land. And my back property is state forestry. So this issue is near and dear to my heart. And quite honestly, the Forest Practices Act has been real frustrating for me. And on page 127, it says, "No unit of local government shall adopt any rules, regulations, or ordinances, or take any other actions that prohibit, limit, regulate, subject to approval, or in any other way affect Forest Practices Act on forest lands located outside of an acknowledged urban growth boundary." So for me, this has felt like I just keep running into a brick wall. Sure. But what I did get out of the forest conversation was Katie Voltek, who is, if I said her last name correctly, okay, thank you, who is the director for North Coast Land Conservancy, and I think you all know her. They have done some beautiful work in the community, getting land and buying land and preserving land. And what she said really touched me, and she said that
the land use plan that we are working on and that we have made a 33-month commitment to work on is an opportunity to make a statement. And what she said is that that statement should include that we value forests beyond fiber, and that this plan should reflect the values of our citizens. And I think we all value clean water for drinking. I think we all value healthy habitat for salmon. So how to get there without running into Forest Practices Act is my challenge. But she sort of gave me hope that even though we're going to write in little words like encourage, and there isn't any enforcement, that we're not changing anybody's rules, that it's still worth our time and worth our energy and worth all of us being in the same room together and discussing this and see if we can't go forward together with common goals. And I just want, and then just one other comment. Just to clarify again, and I thought Andy did a nice job, it is not for us to decide if the buffers on Class 1 streams should be 50 feet or 60 feet or 80 feet. That is not my area of expertise. I would never presume to tell somebody what it should be, number one. Number two, we can't. We can't do any numbers. We won't do any numbers. We will not determine what forest practices should or should not be. And we spent a lot of time looking at those details today, and I think the discussion is very healthy. But in the end, we're just going to end up writing some little meaty mouth things that says, we encourage healthy buffers along streams. So, but I think the discussion is good.
Thank you. Jim, second chance?
Actually, I just have a question, since there'll be several months before we all get back together, public included. Is it permissible under this process to send comments directly to comment either from the public or actually even from the advisory committee? Would they be received, and how should that process be? Should it be sent to Andy? Should it be sent to you? Or
Well, I personally would say send them all to Andy. Yeah, no, but you can send comments to me or to comdev.com. If you go to the county's website and look up land use, I don't even remember what we're called anymore, land use planning, there's an email address down there. And we're on Facebook, so you can put comments on Facebook. So yeah, please send us comments. So,
could I just say we're not precluded from speaking to our state legislators either.
No, you're not.
If these are things are not are in our purview, they are in theirs.
So I'm new to this whole process, and I just want some clarity. This was a totally different format and a totally different group than our last meeting. Will we be having more of what we did last time?
Did you find it useful? Was it good for you?
I don't think it was useful, but I think, well, I shouldn't say that. I think
That's a valid.
I think combining it with this I think you did a great job of keeping people focused on the fact that this is county and not to change the forest practices and not to do that. But I think that there's a lot of people that might have some more input if they knew that we were having more of those meetings. I think it was a spur of the moment, or people didn't get notified in time. I think that there were a lot of good comments. I think that the tour that Greenwood took the members on was amazing, and I think that they learned a lot about it. I wish that everybody would take it. I think it would be a great thing. I'm just curious, this is going to be done for 3 months. Is there going to be any more discussion within this next 3 months that the public can be involved in regarding this number 4?
Yeah, so we're not planning any public meetings or private secret meetings or open houses because we really do need to staff the 3 months to start going back and starting some of the draft rewrites. So we don't have any consultants doing this project. It's all in-house staff. And so between the work that we do every day and then working with the 6 planning area and the committee groups, we just need to have that time off. We welcome comments during that time. You can call me, you can email me, you can email any of the staff. Send us a fax, mail us a letter, however it's best, Facebook, but please continue to comment. But we do not have any scheduled meetings.
I just think the bottom line is education, and I think I learned a lot by attending the last 2 meetings we've had. And I consider myself fairly well educated in the field. I've been doing this a long time, but I learned a lot just sitting here on the way that everything is intermingled. And I just think that we got off on forest practices, that if we focused on Clatsop County and rewriting these, and that input, and just left forest practices out of it for now. Go to a meeting in Portland or Salem and talk to forest practices, talk to the state board. But we need to have a meeting where we can keep all that out of it. I mean, I guess, and that's where I don't know how you do it. I think you did a very good job. I think that if you held another meeting, it might be a little bit more focused. But being 3 months away, I'm just not sure, if we'll get the same turnout. Maybe we will, I don't know.
Yeah, so what will happen is when we come back with the draft rewrites of goals 1 through 4, which is what the committees have covered so far, or will have by the end of this month, then what we want to do is have another round of open houses. We did those in June and July of this year, and it was a very informal format, just, hey, drop by, have some cookies, chat with us, we'll tell you what the process is and why we're doing this. But now that we've gotten meat around this, so to speak, then we can go with the draft revisions and actually hold a more formal meeting where we can go through them. And then anything that comes out of the open houses, we would go back as staff, put those in the drafts as well before we send it back to all the committees to review. So this is not, I know it's the end for this year, but it's not the end of goal 4 or 1 or 2 or 3 or anything that we've covered so far. I would encourage you, if you have people you want to sign up, put their name on the sheet, and they'll get added. And
Are there mailers that you guys send out to all residents in Clatsop County?
We haven't, and that came up as part of the Goal 1 discussions, which is citizen involvement. And so that would be something that we will do now for the next round of open houses that will come up. So, I hope so, because it was really scant. So, no, thanks.
I can't wait.
This is, first of all, as a planner myself, professionally, and I've been in Oregon 35 years. When Gail said we need to redo the comp plan, I took a look at her work plan, and I said, are you kidding me? We need to pay a consultant about $500,000 to help you do this. But she
We're doing it for the price of chocolate.
But one of the things that I think is the strongest, this is one of the strongest comp plan revision programs I've ever seen. I don't know about you,
Me too.
but because we're not using consultants, we're using you. And we're having a huge amount of, the land use plan in Oregon, a lot of people don't like it, but it has very, very strong citizen participation elements. We have to listen to our citizens. And so I thank you all. I thank you all for your service, because you are really working hard. And I thank the people who aren't formal members of the committee for coming, because it's so rich for us to hear what the guys on the ground know. It's so important for us. So help us make the citizen communication as good as it possibly can, and please keep bringing those suggestions in, because they're really exciting. And I do have to say that Gail is doing a terrific job on this. So let her and her overworked staff, let them take 3 months to get this all together in a way that and it's a good 3 months to take off, right? I mean, I don't mind staying home in bad weather. So, thank you all so much, every one of you. Thanks, Andy. You're on a great meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll put my plug in too. So I also serve on the county's budget committee. If you want to see more mailers, when budget cycle comes around, come and tell us. Because the commissioners might not want to hear that, but I think it's a good idea.
No, that's not true. We really do. We really, really do.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. We, again, appreciate your input. Thank you to the committee members and to staff for your good work tonight. Without objection, we are adjourned.
Good job, Andy.
Thank you for